Welcome back, everyone, to Healthy at Home Workshops. This is a free online educational series all about healthy aging and expressly designed to help folks thrive at home, living more safely, more fully, and more joyfully. Today's session I'm very excited about is a cooking class. It's the first of several cooking classes planned over the coming weeks, and they'll all be led by the talented chefs and instructors at 18 Reasons, which is a community-focused culinary school based here, where I am in San Francisco. And before I introduce our teachers, let me quickly reintroduce myself. My name is Jonathan Denholtz, and I run an organization called Aya Places. And we're working with the amazing team at Vivalon, formerly known as Whistle Stop, to develop and produce this educational online series. One reminder to all attendees, it's great to see some familiar names, by the way. This webinar is completely interactive, no formalities here. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to use the buttons at the bottom of your Zoom window. There's a Q&A button and a chat button, and you can type into those at any time, and we'll get back to your questions and comments certainly before the end of the session's out. Okay. Well, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our two guests. First, Rebecca Murillo is a community programs director at 18 Reasons. She's been there for a handful of years. And Rebecca's awesome. She spearheads a couple of very exciting programs that I'm learning all about and I'm kind of in awe of. One is called Cooking Matters, which offers free cooking and nutritional classes to low-income adults and their families all around the 9 counties in the Bay Area. And the other is called The Good Life, and it's been developed in partnership with UC Davis and the City of Oakland. And that one's all about helping inspire older adults get back into the kitchen. So Rebecca, welcome. The second guest is Mike Weller. He's a chef and a teacher at 18 Reasons. Mike's is kind of a legend in San Francisco cooking. His illustrious culinary career includes stints at a number of world-class restaurants. He was the executive chef at the California Culinary Academy and for Le Cordon Bleu in San Francisco. And so, Mike, we're super excited for you to be here and grateful. With that, I think I just want to thank not only you guys, but 18 Reasons, the organization, for kind of their partnership. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to you guys. Thanks, Rebecca.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And thanks again for reaching out to me. For everybody watching, Jonathan's daughter participated in a class with Mike, and that's how we got connected. So I'm really happy that we can bring all of our programs at 18 Reasons together to everybody here watching with the help of Vivalon. So today, like Jonathan said, we're going to be having a all participation encouraged cooking class. If anybody would like to have their cameras turned on and basically make this more of a meeting room situation, please note that in the chat and I can turn your camera on. Otherwise, if anybody has any questions, please just enter it in the chat and I can either mute you, unmute you, turn your camera on, or keep your camera off. So today I will actually let Mike introduce the recipe, but I will basically be the moderator. I'm going to be looking in the chat. I'm going to be telling Mike to slow down if he's going too fast. I'll be asking Mike any of your questions that you enter in the chat because he's going to be busy with the chopping board and the saute pan and all of the mixing. So please really encourage everybody to use the chat as much as possible, or like I said, make it noted that you would like your camera to be turned on so you can talk to us face to face, because it is interesting that we can't see any of you. The other thing that's going to be happening towards the end of this class is that we're going to be doing a short survey just on your experience within this hour and a half that we'll be together. And this is really useful for our programming at 18 Reasons, as COVID has transitioned all of our programming to be virtual, and we're really looking for some feedback on how everybody is experiencing this. But to get us started, before Mike takes it away, I actually have a short poll that I would like people to answer to give us a good sense of what we're working with. So I'm going to, let's see, launch it and it should show up for people. So we have 3 questions, very simple. The first one is, how familiar are you with Zoom? The second is, how confident are you cooking a meal for yourself at home right now? And the third question is, how many days a week do you cook for yourself? So I can actively see what you guys are voting. This is great. This is very fun. Awesome. So it looks like we have 7 of our 11 who have voted so far. So I'm going to wait another 30 seconds, see if we can get anybody else to vote. And then I'll share how we're doing with Mike. Great, we've got 8, 9, 5 seconds left. Great. Okay, that is 10. All right, so I'm going to share the results with everybody. So we have some pretty good spread. Looks like a lot of people are familiar with Zoom, which is great. Maybe you can teach us something since we're all forever sharpening our Zoom skills. We have 60% of everybody is very confident cooking a meal for yourself at home right now, and 40% somewhat confident. And then it looks like a majority of people cook over 3 days a week for themselves, which is great. So hopefully we'll get some really good questions from you guys. And I'm going to stop sharing now. And I am going to stop talking and let Mike talk for a little bit. Awesome. All right. Whenever you're ready to start, Mike.
Fantastic. Well, yeah. Hey, let's cook together. Thank you for being here. I'm having a blast. I love teaching and meeting people online. I enjoy cooking with others, and I learn every time I teach, and I look forward to kind of hanging out with you today. We're going to make a pretty simple meal, but a meal that is easily scalable. I could do this for 20, but it's a meal that's ideal to do for 1. So we're going to make a nice center cut pork loin chop in a saute pan, and then use that same pan to make a little pan chutney or pan gravy with apples and mustard and sage. I've got some broccolini. I'm going to talk about blanching green vegetables and how to reheat them and store them. And I'm literally going to microwave a sweet potato because I wanted a healthy starch on the meal. And the microwave works, so why not use it? So that's kind of the meal plan for the day. I'm going to teach a couple things about knives. I love knives. I have a kind of unhealthy attraction to knives. I have hundreds in my house. I'm very fond of knives. I've worked with them for over 40 years. At 18 Reasons and Cooking Matters, we teach a couple different things with knives. The first step with knife cooking or knife skills, I think, is to shake out your hands. This has got nothing really to do with knives, but it feels really good. And then we teach at 18 Reasons something called the pinch grip, which involves literally putting your thumb on one side of the blade and your index finger on the other side of the blade, and then wrapping your remaining fingers around the handle. Holding a knife like this has a lot of advantages. I have a straight line coming down my shoulder, through my forearm, and out the end of the knife. And by keeping this as a straight line, it unlocks my wrist. It's something I can do easily without putting undue stress on my joints. And it's a very effective way to use a knife. I often see people put their finger on top of the knife blade. Usually people do that because their knives aren't sharp and they need some additional force. The problem is when you move this finger from the pinch to the top of the knife, it locks your wrist in place. And it's one of the reasons I think people find cutting things uncomfortable, because you're locking your wrist before you begin to do your work. So I know habits are difficult to change, but the next time you're in a kitchen with a knife, try this pinch grip. With the other hand, we teach families and kids and teenagers and all kinds of people. This is really easy to teach 8-year-olds. We tell them to make a monster claw like they're a werewolf. If you take your other hand and pull your fingers back this way, the second joint makes a natural guide to rest your knife against. It's kind of counterintuitive, but in a kitchen, the more dangerous something is, the closer you want to get to it. So if you're worried about your knife, the tendency is to have your other hand go wandering all over the kitchen to keep it away from the knife. But the problem is, if your other hand is wandering, it inevitably ends up under the blade. But by using this monster claw grip and putting the knife actually against that second joint as a guide, in theory, so long as you never raise your knife blade higher than the height of your knuckle, you can't cut yourself. It just is a theory. It's not a dare. I'm not daring you on this, but it's a very safe way to handle food and your knife. I think the last aspect of this is that I hear people say all the time, I hate chopping vegetables. I hate chopping vegetables too, because a knife isn't an axe. So with an axe, you have one sharp edge and you bring the axe up and down. And that's the way the tool is designed to work. A knife isn't designed to work like that. All kitchen knives, even the ones that look like they have a very smooth blade, actually have a series of very minute teeth. This tool is far closer in feel and design to a saw rather than an axe. So rather than pushing the knife straight up and down, the knife works best when it's moving back and forth. Nobody ever pushed a saw through a 2x4. You push it and pull it, and that is the way a knife works best as well. So cutting this way will enable you to cut much more effectively and much easier with less effort and more joy, which is what cooking should be. One last knife tip, and then I'm going to cook something because I like cooking things. This tool in the kitchen is called a steel or a honing rod. I use this daily, and I would encourage you to use one of these daily. Every time you cook, you should be using this before you begin. All those little teeth on the knife that I spoke of, as you use them, those little teeth get bent. And so a really effective knife looks like this, but as you use your knife, the teeth get bent. And if you've never used a steel, the teeth on your knife look something like this. What a steel does is it realigns those teeth into a straight line. And it immediately makes your knife incredibly more effective. So to use one of these, I set it against a towel. I hold the steel straight up and down. I put my blade alongside it at an angle of about 15 to 20 degrees. I'm a cook, I have a cook brain. I don't know 15 to 20 degrees. I know this is 90 and that's bad. Half of 90 is 45, I'm getting closer. Half of 45 is 22 and a half. I'm gonna go in a little bit from there. And that's close enough for kitchen work. And then I'm using my index finger on this hand to push really hard. So I'm pushing the blade of the knife against the steel. I start at the back of the knife and I pull back. And then I put the blade on the other side of the steel at the same angle, and I use my arm muscle to pull it against the steel, and I pull back. If you do that 3 times, you can actually hear your knife say, "Thank you." And it will make cooking so much easier and more delightful. You will again have a knife that works like it did when you first bought it. It's a wonderful, fun technique. It doesn't take long. I love the sound. I do it as a meditation. It helps relax me before I teach classes. So I always hone my knife before I teach a class because it relaxes me and it's kind of fun. So another aspect of cooking that I think I would encourage people to do, the French call it mise en place. Mise en place is everything in its place. So today I'm cooking 3 things. I'm cooking a sweet potato, I'm cooking some broccolini, and I'm cooking a pork chop. And I have all of my ingredients out. So in the middle of cooking, I don't have to stop and go find the cornstarch.
Mike, I got
Partially
a
because I'm
question.
doing a demo. Yeah.
Sorry. I got a question regarding the knife. So just before we get too far away, BK is asking, is there a knife that will just stay sharp? Because they don't see themselves sharpening a knife every day. So what sort of advice would you give for someone who might not be down for sharpening every day?
There aren't knives that stay sharp forever. There is an alternative that will help. First, I encourage you to use the steel. And if you don't do it every day, if you do it once a week, that's better than never doing it. But as an alternative, they do make these beautiful little puppies. This is a ceramic knife. If you've ever dropped a plate on the floor and cut yourself on the broken edge because it's so sharp, that's the principle behind a ceramic knife. Ceramic knives are really light and comfortable, and they don't need honing to the extent that a steel knife does. So that might be a good alternative, both because it's very light and easy to use, and because it requires less honing.
Great. And I actually have a set of ceramic knives also, and I can confirm that they are pretty sharp. One thing that I would note on ceramic knives is that don't cut anything too hard, because I think I once tried to cut a squash with a ceramic knife, which was bad, and then I chipped my knife, and then I could not use it anymore. So ceramic knives are great for maybe softer textured foods.
In a similar way, if I drop my steel knife off the table and it hits the floor, it's likely to chip the floor, but a ceramic knife is more likely to break. Most brands now include a lifetime guarantee, so if it chips or breaks in some way, you can have it replaced. You might want to look into that, Rebecca,
Yes.
on your squash knife. Yeah, just as an alternative. I enjoy ceramic knives. I'm fond of all kinds of knives. Are we ready to cook?
Yes, we were on mise en place.
Mise en place. So for the pork chop, I have half a red onion, half a green apple, and some sage leaves. And I'm going to use these things and cutting these things to show some cutting techniques. So I love onions. I love using onions. I love the flavor of onions. Here's half a red onion that I've cut through the root end. I have big fat sausage fingers, and I keep my fingernails cut really short. So peeling an onion is kind of challenging for me. I find that if I take just a little piece, if this is the root end on this side, if I take a little piece off the other end of the onion, just a tiny little sliver, that then gives me a place where even with my fingers, I can easily peel the onion. The peel comes right off. We're going to want this onion to be diced. So to dice an onion, I point the root end away from me, and I drop the knife in the middle, and I cut all the way through the onion and through the root end. And I'm going to do this a quarter at a time. So with that root end pointed away, I cut down from above all the way through the onion, but not through the root end of the onion. I do that 2 or 3 times, maybe 4. And because the root end is intact, the onion's not falling apart. I flip it over onto its other flat side and do the same thing this way. 3 cuts this way. And then when I turn the onion sideways, every stroke I take with my knife leaves me perfectly diced onions, which is handy. We'll do that again with the other quarter of the onion, and we'll have a pile of beautifully diced red onions. Go. So with the apple, I need about half a green apple. If I was cooking in a fancy French restaurant again, I would probably peel this apple, but I love the texture of apple skins, and there's extra nutrition in the skin, and I don't want to waste it. So I'm going to leave the skin on. I'm going to take, looking down from above, I know the core of the apple is right here. So I'm going to take and make some slices through the apple this way. And I'm going to use these slices to cut the apple into dice. So a slice like that, and then I'm going to go through and cut the slice into strips. Turn the strips sideways, and go back through and dice. I'm going to put the onions and the apples into the dish at the same time. I know that's happening. So because I know they're going in at the same time, I can leave them in the same bowl or in the same spot on my board. It'll save me a step and a dish to wash, which is always important.
I love having the least amount of dishes possible, so great tip.
Mostly at my house, and camera person does the dishes. So if I can make less dishes, it helps many things. So, with this part done, we've got one more thing to do for our pan sauce. I have some sage leaves. Now, today I'm using sage.
I have one more question. BK is also asking, is that cutting board marble, or what is better over plastic or wood?
I love that question. Thank you, BK. I like them both. My knives prefer wood, but this is a food safe plastic cutting board on top of a big wooden butcher block, because this is about a 150-year-old butcher block here. It's a beautiful piece. But plastic cleans well. Wood does not clean as thoroughly as plastic does. So if I was only making salads, I might use a wooden cutting board. But if today I've already used this board to trim up my with a special sixer. I wouldn't use a marble cutting board with a knife because I love my knives, and marble kills knives. I love rolling out dough on marble though. If anyone has a spare chunk wandering around loose, I'll pick it up. Yeah.
Great. And we have Glennis, who has raised her hand. Glennis, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Yay.
Awesome. Let's see. Okay, I've asked to unmute you, so hopefully you should see a prompt on your screen. And you will click. Great, we can hear you.
Yes, I just wondered if the core, if he used any of the core of the apple. It looked like when he was first slicing the apple that he was very close to the core.
The core is actually edible. I didn't use any of the seeds. And because I'm only using half the apple, I didn't end up using any of the core. But if I'm dicing it this small, I wouldn't hesitate. I would not put any apple seeds in. They tend to be bitter.
Thank you.
Great. Did you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. I am going to remute you. Great. Great.
And then, so with this pan sauce today, we're using sage. It works with thyme, it works with rosemary, it works with all kinds of fresh herbs. Herbs are expensive at the store. I'm really lucky. My wife and camera person is also a master gardener, so we have pots of herbs on our deck. But I think anybody, even without my beautiful wife, I can grow rosemary. Rosemary is almost impossible to kill. So a little fresh rosemary in a pot on the window saves you a bunch of money. So with the sage, I'm going to take 3 sage leaves and I'm going to stack them one on top of the other. And this is called a chiffonade in French cooking. You stack the leaves and then roll them up into a cigar. And then run your knife through that cigar. You end up with little strips. Chiffonade is from the same root as chiffon. And we're going to use those little strips of sage in our chutney. So with that done, I've got a pot on the stove. I'm going to start heating up some salted water. How much salt is a hard question to ask without seeing your pot and how much water you have. So I want enough salt in the water so that the water tastes salty. One of the best answers to how much should I use is to put it in your mouth and use it till it tastes good. I really love, I obviously love eating food, but I think tasting is a really important step in cooking. So I'm going to bring that water up to a boil and grab my broccolini here.
Mike, I have a question that I've heard in some other classes for seniors that I've done is what should you do if you're trying to limit your salt intake? Say you're having issues with high blood pressure or something like that.
Well, I wear a white chef's coat, not a doctor's coat. So culinarily, oftentimes acidity will increase the perception of salt. So when we serve the broccolini today, I'm going to add a little lemon juice to it before I add any salt. And I have found that by adding an acid first, you need to use less salt than you normally would. Also, I had, for my own case, not dispensing any advice here, I had that talk with my own doctor about high blood pressure. And we finished a very long, involved discussion, asked a lot of questions. At the end of the whole thing, I thanked her because she didn't mention salt to me. And I pointed that out. I said, you didn't mention salt. And she said, Mike, you're a chef. I'm not worried about salt. Because the fact is when you're using salt in a home setting, you literally cannot use as much salt as Stouffer's put in their frozen mac and cheese, right? It's processed food. It's the can of, I grew up on cream of mushroom soup. I had that as a flavor memory that will never leave. But the amount of salt in a can of cream of mushroom soup is ridiculous. When you add your own salt to your own food, you tend to use a lot less. Now, if your doctor is still advising that you reduce your sodium intake, then I would start by using acidity and then pumping up the flavors around as much as possible.
Great. Thank you. That was very useful.
So these are broccolini. I love this vegetable. It is a cruciferous vegetable. Cruciferous means cross-bearing, cross-like. The flowers on cruciferous vegetables have a cross shape. Cruciferous vegetables have a lot of things in common. All of them are really nutritious. They all have sulfur compounds in them, which means the longer you cook them, the more sulfur compounds are developed and released. So if you think about cooking a big pot of broccoli or cabbage, there is an unmistakable aroma that comes off of overcooked cabbage and overcooked cruciferous vegetables. The whole house fills with that maybe not enjoyable aroma. So I think the secret is to cook things, especially cruciferous vegetables, briefly. They're also a green vegetable. So the technique I'm going to use today is called blanching. I'm going to hold one of these broccolini on the side, just so we can compare the color that change that occurs. So blanching involves dropping a vegetable into salted boiling water and cooking briefly. In that cooking process, many of the nutrients become more accessible, and a lot of the non-green pigments in the vegetable dissipate, which allows more of the green to show through. We're going to see a really remarkable color change. So I would encourage folks to buy their vegetables and blanch them ahead of time, and then just have in your fridge a container of blanched vegetables you can then reheat. The vegetables last for a very long time when they're blanched. If you blanch them when they begin to fade, you can buy an extra 3 or 4 days of refrigerator life with blanched vegetables, and it makes adding vegetables to a dish later in the week really easy to do. So the other thing you need, other than a pot of boiling salted water, is you need a pot of ice water. It is really important when you're done blanching to stop the cooking by moving the vegetables to ice water.
Good to go.
Right. So I use tongs pretty frequently in the kitchen. I like that with a pair of tongs, I can pull this broccolini out of the boiling salted water without having to deal with a whole pot full of boiling salted water. If I just pull the vegetable out, I can let the water cool off and deal with it later. It's a handy way of dealing with food. So we're going to blanch this broccolini. Just as soon as I must be watching that pot because it refuses to come to a boil.
And the good thing is, well, we have another question now that came through the Q&A feature. So another way that you guys can all ask questions. Karen is asking, how would you reheat the veggies after you've blanched them?
So we're going to do it today. I'm going to get a saute pan and a little bit of oil, or if I'm feeling extravagant, a little bit of butter, and a little bit of water on the broccolini after it's been blanched. And we're going to throw damp broccolini into a hot saute pan. I'm going to squeeze on half a lemon and use the lemon juice to flavor and steam the broccolini hot again. Use that little bit of fat either as a vegetable oil or as butter to kind of coat and shine up the broccolini. And then I'll season it and it'll be ready to serve in under a minute, which is a good time. It also would enable me to add flavors at that point. You could throw in a little bit of grated ginger or garlic and just build flavors.
Mm-hmm. Could you also just put it in the microwave?
You could.
If for say you had a few extra little stalks of broccolini you wanted to save for the next day.
Microwaves work. I am not one of those chefs who hates microwaves. Microwaves work. I'm going to use one today to make a sweet potato because why not? As a matter of fact, I'm going to do that now. So this vegetable is a sweet potato. When it has orange flesh, it's often sold as or referred to as a yam. I'm not here to argue with what people call things. Botanically, this is not a yam. An actual yam is about that long, that big around, and shaggy and fibrous, and is found in Africa and is delicious, but a completely different vegetable. But by habit and tradition in the United States, if a sweet potato has orange flesh, it is often referred to as a yam. And that's fine. I'm going to poke several holes through the skin. This prevents steam from building up, so my potato doesn't burst. And I'm going to put it on a kitchen towel and put it in the microwave. And we'll get this puppy started.
That is so many more holes than I typically poke in my microwave sweet potatoes.
It might be therapy.
Yeah. Maybe if anybody needs to get out a little some sort of feelings, you can just microwave your sweet potatoes. Microwave a bunch of sweet potatoes.
Okay, well, good news. Almost good news. I'm going to put this over here so we can see it happening. It shouldn't take much longer. We'll have boiling salted water. We'll have broccoli and a sweet potato to have with our pork today.
Awesome. Did anybody have any other questions while we are patiently awaiting our water to boil? Like we had another person just join us. Welcome.
Welcome and happy days. So,
yeah. Still not seeing any other questions coming up. You can also raise your hand if you guys want. But yeah,
at 18 Reasons, we teach public classes just about every night. We have a huge faculty of cooks from around the world, and a really diverse catalog of classes that we offer every month. So, if you,
I think Mike's doing a pumpkin one next Saturday, right? Next Saturday?
This
Saturday.
End of October already, Rebecca. We're doing.
I can't believe it.
A savory pumpkin class on Halloween.
Oh, Sean has a great question. Can you freeze your blanched vegetables, and how long will they keep?
You can freeze blanched vegetables. It does impact their texture a bit, but once frozen, they keep for months. But I like my vegetables to still have a little bite or just a bit of crispness to them. What I teach is that there should be some resistance to the tooth, but your dining partner shouldn't hear you eating your vegetables. And it's a little harder to do if you freeze your vegetables. The frozen vegetables we buy at the store are flash frozen, which doesn't alter the texture as much. Mm-hmm. We now have boiling water. So I'm going to.
And I have another question too.
Okay, it'll stay boiling.
Yeah, which is, just extra boiling. Karen asked, why a kitchen towel under the sweet potato?
It tends to put out some moisture, and it kind of holds the potato in place.
And you don't want, you don't want all those potato juices coming out onto your nice microwave plate.
See earlier comments about limiting cleanup.
Yeah.
Do enough damage to this kitchen daily. I don't need to add.
Yeah, you guys will see next week when I demo. I often try to limit any amount of dishes that I use. That's like I am lazy. I use the least amount of dishes that I can.
So great. I'm going to take this bunch of broccolini. I'm just going to throw it in over on stove can. into my boiling salted water. Just make sure it's all going in there. I'm going to check my potato, turn it over, and cook it for a little bit longer.
I have another good question from Glennis. They ask, why do restaurants serve hard broccoli?
It is really, so it is very challenging in a restaurant to pick a happy medium. I think that it was fashionable to undercook vegetables for a long time. And somewhere between cooked until dead and raw, you have to draw a line, and drawing a line that makes everybody happy is challenging to do.
Mm-hmm. So really it was just a trend. Bit of a trend.
It's sometimes also bad cooking.
Mm. Maybe someone's trying to save a little too much time. Awesome.
One of the things I really enjoy about teaching people to cook at home is when you're cooking at home, you get to cook to your own taste. And if it's not cooked enough, you can cook it some more. So right now, my broccoli is still a bit crunchy, but the boiling salted water has really brought out a lot of flavor. I think if you look, you can see the color change, pretty dramatic. We got a nice vibrant green on the blanched ones and this kind of gray pale green on the unblanched. And again, the nutrition is also improved by blanching. So there we go. Once you get your vegetables to the point where you like them, I'm taking out these beautiful vegetables and immediately into a bowl of ice water to stop the cooking. And then from that point, we'll reheat them quickly today for our lunch. But holding them in a bowl of ice water stops the cooking immediately. We have that beautiful, dark, vibrant green color on these now. And we're all set. So it must be time to do a pork chop.
And Glennis asks, how long did you blanch it for?
That was a total of about 3 minutes.
Great. Nice and quick.
Also, I pulled it maybe a little bit undercooked because I know in reheating it, I'm going to cook it a little bit more. So next step is a pork chop. This is a very lean piece of pork. It's a center cut, boneless, center cut loin pork chop. It weighs about 8 ounces. So this is pretty large sized lunch, but you could easily cut that in half if you wanted a 4-ounce portion. It's a pretty adaptable cut. I'm going to add some salt. When I season anything, I season from a height. If you get down close, you tend to clump up your seasoning. If you season from way high above, you put an even coat of salt on the food. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper. No need to use freshly cracked pepper if you're going to immediately put this meat into a hot saute pan. All the beautiful aromatics from fresh pepper are driven off at the saute pan temperatures. So I pepper that I ground earlier in the week. And there's a nice little piece of pork. I have a saute pan. First step is always to heat up the saute pan. Get the pan hot, then add in oil and let the oil get hot.
Is that your potato?
That's my potato.
Great.
It's getting there. It's not done yet.
Okay. So you put it on how many minutes again?
It varies with your microwave. And you cook it till it's done. If cooking was hard to do, I couldn't have done it for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
If it's not done, cook it some more. So my pan is hot. I'm adding some oil. It almost immediately gets hot in this very hot pan. So I'm going to add, I've got my heat on, medium high. I'm going to add this piece of pork away from me. I'm going to set it in and let it fall away from me. And I'm just going to leave it sit in that pan under medium high heat. And I'm going to let it develop a crust. You'll see people all the time try and turn something that's sticking to the pan. If the food is sticking to the pan, it means it hasn't cooked on that side enough. When it's cooked enough, it'll form a crust and release very easily. So that is one of the keys here. I'm also not using a non-stick pan. I use non-stick pans for eggs, and that's about it. I want some of that meat to stick to the pan. I want to have little crusty caramelized bit of yummy goodness stuck on my pan, because that's what we're going to use to make our pan sauce with.
Like, could you also use something like a cast iron skillet to make this pork?
Cast iron would be beautiful.
Okay. Great. I'm going to spotlight your stove cam so we can see everything going on over there.
I have the fan on, Rebecca. Is that coming off too loud over?
No, I cannot hear it.
Oh, okay.
It's looking good. I am getting really hungry, so I can't imagine how everybody else feels right now.
So I cooked it long enough. I know because it burns very easily. I've got a nice deep golden brown color on that side. So I'm turning it over and cooking the other side. And we're just going to keep cooking it. Maybe a total of 6-7 minutes. I like my pork to be at about 140, 145 degrees internal temperature, which is medium with a slight blush of pink. If you like your pork done more, cook it more.
Okay.
So just as a process, as soon as this pork is done cooking, most of the way, I'm going to take it out and we're going to start building a pan sauce or a chutney or a gravy in the pan. There is flavor happening in that pan right now. I don't want any flavor to get away. So I'm going to make sure I get that flavor out of the pan and into my chutney or gravy.
And Mike, do you usually use a thermometer when you're measuring or taking the temp of your meat, or how do you usually do?
So I'm not going to today because I've cooked a couple pork chops in my life. But I own and frequently use one of these instant read digital thermometers. They're very inexpensive. They have a display that lights up, so they're easy to read. And they make certain that your food is at the temperature you want it to be. It's really important with chicken that it gets cooked to at least 165 degrees internal to kill the salmonella. So it's a safety device and a guide to better cooking your meat.
And for this pork chop, would you put the thermometer just like right in the middle?
Yeah, I'm going to show you.
Okay. Oh, great. Here, I'll spotlight that right now. Great. Oh, coming back.
I want it to be in the thickest part down there in the middle. And we're good. Just like that.
Wow.
So in this pan on the stove, I'm going to pour off all but maybe a couple teaspoons of the excess fat. In that pan right now, I've got all these little browned on bits of love. Those are called souks. There are some otherwise good cooking programs that call that fond. That is not fond. That is souks. So we're going to have a hot pan. And into that hot pan, we're going to add those apples and onions that we cut up earlier. With the sound that we love. Like that. I'm going to take a wooden spoon and the juices that come out of this apple and onion, I'm going to start scrubbing the bottom of the pan clean. I just want to soften these fruits and vegetables up a little bit on the pan. Just begin to cook them.
Mike, I have a question. Does this technically count as deglazing the pan? Okay.
This point right now is the beginning of that process. We're going to add in a cup of chicken stock and a half a cup of white wine. When we add the actual liquid, that will be deglazing the pan and creating a fond.
Got it. Okay. I've heard that term just thrown around so many times in so many different ways. And I just wanted a little clarification. Thank you. BK says the pork chop looks delicious or looks good.
Now I'm going to add that. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Stock and wine. And the dishwasher at a restaurant always knows who the best cook is, because the best cooks clean their pans. All of that brown stuff stuck to the bottom of the pan is flavor. So by using this wooden spoon to scrub the bottom of the pan, I'm dissolving those souks and deglazing the pan and adding all of that flavor into my sauce. This pan will not only be easier to wash at the end, my sauce will also taste better because of it. And I'm going to throw in those sage leaves now. I can tell that the bottom of my pan is clean. My vegetables are finishing their cooking. I'm just going to cook this down to concentrate the flavors. When you see a pot with boiling liquid in and the steam coming out the top, that steam is water. And water doesn't taste good. So when water leaves, it leaves flavor behind. So by cooking a sauce down, what you're doing is removing the water and concentrating the flavors left behind. I'm going to let that cook down for a little bit. My plan is, once I get this pan chutney to the place I want it, I'm going to reintroduce my pork chop and rewarm my pork chop through and add any juices that have accumulated as the pork chop has rested. I'm going to add back into my sauce. If you like chefs, you call us thrifty. The reality is we're cheap. I don't want to lose, I paid for that pork chop. I don't want to lose any pork chop flavor. So I'm going to add in about a teaspoon of Dijon style mustard now. I love mustard and apple and pork together. I think it's a great flavor. And I love mustard. If we wanted to, we could add cream to this sauce. I find that cream often kind of mutes or dampens the intensity of flavors. But there's no denying it. If it got any colder out, sometimes a creamy sauce just is like a warm hug. So decisions. Today we're going with a very healthy, very low fat version of a pan sauce. As that cooks down, I'm going to know it has cooked down far enough when it tastes good. When those apples are just barely tender, and when I start getting a concentration of flavor. That's pretty good. I do like cooking. So this same technique easily works for 4 pork chops, and it just as easily works for a half a pork chop. And it doesn't dirty an extra dish to make a sauce or a gravy.
If you had extra sauce or gravy, could you also keep that for a few days?
Yeah, this same sauce would taste fantastic on a piece of roast chicken tomorrow night. I am going to have a little extra sauce, but I'm serving pork chops tonight, so I'm not worried about it. So now it is cooked down enough that when I stir it, the sauce has thickened to the point where I'm beginning to see the bottom of the pan. This is where you get to make a call. I want this to be a little thicker than it is now. So I'm going to add in a splash of a slurry, a combination of cornstarch and liquid. And that combination of cornstarch and a liquid will thicken that just enough. And that is my gravy done.
And I have a question coming in. Sean asks, any other proteins besides pork that could work well in this sauce? I know you did just say chicken, but maybe there are some others.
A really hearty piece of fish would be nice with this. I wouldn't use this particular sauce necessarily with beef, but if I used red wine and beef stock, this same technique would work with beef. I think this sauce would go really nicely with some vegetables like a winter squash. So now that I've thickened it with the slurry, I've reintroduced my pork chop into the warm pan and all the juices that came off it as it rested. I'm going to just leave that to reheat. And I'm going to heat up a pan and saute my broccolini. I'm going to cut my sweet potato in half and serve half of that. And we'll call it a meal. If I was feeling a little extravagant, I could put a tablespoon of butter into my pan sauce. I don't think it needs it today. The sauce reduced really nicely. Butter will add a little bit of glossy sheen to the sauce. We'll thicken it a little bit, but I'm kind of liking the sauce as is today.
And could you go over the proportions of the slurry?
Equal parts cornstarch and a liquid. In my case, I had an open bottle of white wine, so I went with white wine. I used a tablespoon of cornstarch and a tablespoon of white wine. I didn't use all of that slurry, but I mixed those two things together.
Great. I feel like that's a really good technique that I've learned from taking your classes as someone who wasn't very familiar with using cornstarch in my cooking.
Is in a hurry, use a slurry because it pretty much instantly thickens. So I've got a hot saute pan, a little splash of vegetable oil, and I'm going to grab some of my broccolini that I blanched off. And I'm throwing that into my hot saute pan. It's steaming and reheating. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. And then, just a trick, I have a lemon that I'm putting into my pair of tongs. And I'm using the tongs as a lever to squeeze the lemon juice in. The tongs get much more juice out than just squeezing by hand would. Man, the tool user.
Wow. That is something that I had never used before. Great tip.
So that fast, my broccolini is hot and seasoned with salt and lemon and vibrant green. I've got a pork chop and a pan sauce. I have a sweet potato in the microwave. It is well and thoroughly done. I'm going to put together a plate. We'll have a little lunch today.
And now, as Mike is preparing his plate, now's a great time if you guys have any other questions that you'd like to ask. We do have, a good amount of time left. So please put any questions in either the Q&A box, the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. Okay, we do have a hand that was just raised. BK, I'm going to allow you to talk. You should see a prompt. Great.
Hi, I'm not diabetic, but I've heard that microwaving a white potato kind of jacks up the glycemic value. Is that true for a sweet potato too?
That I'm actually not sure of.
I cannot verify that.
Okay, I really should look it up anyway. I just read it. I'm not sure if it's.
Yeah.
I can promise you I'm going to check into it as soon as I'm not putting this plate together.
All right, thanks, BK. Okay, and then Robert asks, why did you choose to microwave the potato over other choices?
I wasn't sure how long this demo would take, and it seemed silly to heat up the entire hot box of my oven to bake the sweet potato all by its little lonesome in my oven. I love using sweet potatoes all kinds of different ways, but I wanted something that would be accessible and friendly to all levels of cooking. It's pretty versatile, quick and easy. I too am lazy. I was born lazy. I've been practicing ever since.
And then we have two more questions that came up in the chat. First is, any reason vegetable oil is used instead of extra virgin olive oil to cook the broccolini?
My vegetable oil was out, I might consider using an extra virgin olive oil. Perhaps not if that was a pretty high heat I had. I mean, lots of the reasons you use an extra virgin olive oil are eliminated in a really high heat environment because the flavor is cooked off. I love extra virgin olive oil, but it works better as a salad dressing or a vinaigrette, or if I was to drizzle some over the plate now, that preserves all the flavor that you pay the extra money for.
And then one more question in here was Sean is asking, he says, I was making a hollandaise sauce the other day. I was impatient, so it was a little runny. Would a slurry have helped it?
Unfortunately, no. I love hollandaise. In order to activate a slurry, the temperature has to reach typically somewhere just north of 197 degrees. So in order to make the starches in the cornstarch gelatinize, you would have had to cook the hollandaise to the point where it broke even worse. But I love the thinking. If I could have saved hollandaise sauces over the last 40 years with some cornstarch, that would be genius. But unfortunately, because the temperature required to activate a slurry is so high, it wouldn't work for a hollandaise. With a broken hollandaise, one thing you can always do is start a new hollandaise with one more egg yolk and cook that egg yolk. And then instead of adding melted butter into your egg yolk, add your broken sauce into the egg yolk, and you'll come out with a beautiful hollandaise.
Great. Okay. Those were the only questions that we had. So let's see that plate again. Looked really good. Thanks, Celia.
Just a little lunch.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, we can move into the short survey portion, and maybe Jonathan will rejoin us on video and see if he has any other closing items. Okay.
This is great, Rebecca. Thank you, Mike. Rebecca, do you want to walk us through your survey, and then I'll kind of wrap it up after you're done?
Yeah. Yes, and also I see Karen asked, can we resend the recipe? So I will have Jonathan, you have everybody's emails, right? So Jonathan can resend the recipe.
Be on my plate.
And great. Yeah, so we have a survey that we've been trying to do with our programming at 18 Reasons to help us better understand how this virtual learning experience is going for people. But I would like to preface this with some of the questions we've been doing a lot of families programming. So some of the questions do use language that regards like, do you have children ages 0 to 5? But every survey that gets filled out really helps us expand our programming and continue to get funding so we can keep doing all these. So I'm gonna post the form in the chat box. And if people would please begin filling that out, it'd be great if we could get these completed today because they're all timestamped and that's how I enter them. And I see we have another question. So I will allow Glennis to talk again as hopefully people are filling out the survey. Okay. Glennis.
I just wanted to thank him.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Glennis, and thank you so much for joining us.
In the recipes we send out at the bottom of every page is my work email. Email is not my favorite aspect of my job at 18 Reasons. I love my job at 18 Reasons. Opening my email inbox is not a high point, but student emails really help my day. So if you have a culinary question you think of, go ahead and shoot me an email at that email address. I love talking about food.
And it's going to do something else. Karen says don't have the survey. So you should be able to click on this link, Karen, and it should take you to something titled Online Participant Survey. So if you aren't seeing
I don't
that,
have it. I don't have it either.
okay. Can you see it in the chat? If you open the chat function on your Zoom.
There is a link, but I don't know if it's the survey. It
It's the
ends
link.
with Mark 5A.
Yeah, yes, that is the survey. And we're all adapting to virtual platforms. Usually we have paper surveys and it's very easy for everybody to fill them out. So really any feedback that you all have, there are a few questions at the end of the survey where you can provide any extra feedback for us, any tips, and anything that would help us with these classes. We have another question in the chat. It says, Mike, do you think buying organic is worth it?
Yes.
Mike says yes. Sorry, that was Mike.
So there is a reality because of many different, very involved questions. There is no doubt that organic food costs more than mass-produced food. Organic food is more nutrient dense, so it is on that level better for you. I don't always buy organic. I live on a budget too, and sometimes I just can't do it. But anytime I can, I will. I think as importantly as the fact that it is better for me, it is better for all of us. There is a cost entailed in 1,000 acres of the same plant in one place. For all that it makes production and harvesting easier, it comes at a cost of tremendous requirements for both fertilizer and pesticides. And nothing's free. And I think if all the costs were fairly added to the piece of fruit you're buying, mass-produced factory fruit would be every bit as expensive and even more expensive than organic. It comes down to when do you want to pay? So yes, simple answer, yes. I think organic's worth it.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great answer. So, all right. Any more questions? Jonathan, we'll invite you back in.
Thanks again, guys. My only regret is I didn't cook along this week. But the good news is I've sharpened every knife in my house. My wife is going to be very proud of me, if nothing else.
Amazing.
Thanks for all the good tips. I do want to. This was fantastic. I want to thank Mike, you for walking us through the recipe and the lesson, and Rebecca for you for hosting. Did an amazing job, and just thank you to 18 Reasons for all the organization's goodwill and partnership. I also want to thank the folks at Vivalon who sponsored this event, Joanna and her team. Thank you, Joanna. And I also want to thank everybody who showed up today. I hope you found it inspiring and fun. And I hope you guys come back next week. 18 Reasons will be here again and the week after. So
did you want me to go over those classes?
Yeah, sure.
Really
You want to?
okay. Yeah, I realized I could might
Go
as well. Yeah, so next week, like Jonathan said, we have 2 more classes here. Next week, we're going to be focusing on mind diet fundamentals and eating for healthy aging. So as Jonathan said, I've been working with both UC Davis and the City of Oakland to develop a curriculum essentially for Alzheimer's preventions in older adults. So I've been doing a good amount of reading and research on what that looks like even. And I think that, you know, at any age, you can always eat for healthy aging. So I'll be going over a little more, a more in-depth view of what that diet looks like, as well as demonstrating a massaged kale salad with balsamic vinaigrette and I think they're like quick pickled red onions. So we're going to be going through that next week. And then the week after that, we have our other coworker, Tom Dawson, who is going to be reviewing some other budgeting tips as well as shopping tips, and basically ways you could budget and shop when you are just cooking for one or, you know, a few people.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it. That is it for today's Healthy at Home workshop. 18 reasons. Mike, Rebecca, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.